Welcome back to the Dog Dish. I'm your host, Dwayne Daugherty, and this is part 2 of our traditional Irish-American, New England-style corned beef, cabbage, and potato St. Patrick's Day dinner. If you'll remember from part 1, we corned our own beef. That is, we took a beef brisket, we used pickling spices and salt and sugar and made a brine and kept it in the refrigerator for several days. We're going to take that now and we're going to turn that into our supper. I mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit more about Ireland in this episode as well, and we're going to do this by basically doing this in 3 parts. First of all, we've got to get this meat ready to go because the meat takes 2 to 2.5 hours to cook before you can even begin to put the vegetables in it, depending on the size of the meat, obviously. So we're going to take this, we're going to show you how to get it ready, we're going to put it on the stove and get it rolling, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Ireland, show you a few pictures of our trip to Ireland and some of the things that we learned and I picked up about Irish history and about the history of our family. And then we're going to come back and show you how to put the meal together and plate it and serve it for your family. We'll start off with, this is our gray corned beef. Again, the gray corned beef does not have the sodium nitrite that keeps it hot pink like the stuff you buy in the store. If you want to use one of those that you buy in the store that's that pink color, that's fine. I've used plenty of them in my life, but this is the one that we did from part 1. You can see we have taken the brine, taken it out of the brine, we've rinsed it off, we've put it in a heavy cast iron Dutch oven. If you don't have a heavy cast iron Dutch oven, you can use a soup pot. You can use any big pot. It's just got to be enough that you can get water completely over the top of the brisket. Okay? So we've got our brisket here. We're going to add to that a beer. And in this case, I'm going to use a local Irish ale from a local brewery here in my hometown. You can use whatever you like. I like the taste of an Irish ale. You could add an American Pilsner beer. That would be fine too. Some people add Guinness Stout to this. Guinness Stout certainly adds an awful lot of flavor to it, but I prefer my Guinness Stout in my mouth. So we're going to pour this red Irish ale over the top of our brisket. We're going to add to that enough filtered water. And remember what we talked about filtered water, how important it is to have water that is filtered so that we are not adding a lot of additional flavors to it that come from the chlorine and the minerals and the other sediments in tap water. We want to start with as clean a base as possible so we get to decide what flavors we add. So we're going to add just enough water to this. It looks like I had just enough in there. Good eye. To cover our brisket. Now, we do not need, for this, any salt. There's plenty of salt in the brisket that will then leach out into the brine, or into the stock liquid that will then season our vegetables. If we need to adjust it a little later, we can do that as we get ready to put the vegetables into the water. What we do want to add, though, again, we want a couple of bay leaves. So we want to add a couple of bay leaves to this. A very traditional flavor in this. We also want to add to this some allspice. Remember I told you before, allspice is not all spices, it's just one spice. But it's a really good flavor for this, and I'm going to add about a 1/4 teaspoon, which equals about maybe 8 or 10 corns. And then I want to also add some peppercorn. Now, you'll notice I am using a multicolored peppercorn, which I really like in this. If you want to use black peppercorns, that's fine. If you don't have whole peppercorns or whole allspice, you could certainly use about 1/8 teaspoon of ground and put it in there, and that would be fine too. Just a ground black pepper or ground allspice, if that's all you have in your cupboard, put that in there and that'll be fine. So here's our basic seasonings for this pot. Now what we want to do is we want to put our lid on the pot and we bring this pot up to a high rolling boil. You want to keep an eye on it so that it doesn't boil over. Of course, that could create a real mess and a real hazard in your kitchen. So keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't boil over. As it starts to boil, the fat in the meats will release and it will create a froth on top. It's kind of a stiff, foamy froth on top. You want to try and skim that off with either a spoon, or I've got like a little screen mesh device that I use. Skim that off because that will make you a more clear broth for your vegetables later, and it'll be a much better broth. So we'll go ahead then, get this started, and we're going to come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Ireland, and then after that, we're going to show you how this all comes together. Stay with us. Oh, that's a little bit more room there. Had you up close to see what was on the stove. Let's stretch it out a little bit now. As you can see, we still have our Dutch oven on the stove with our corned beef in it. We brought it up to a boil. We skimmed off what little bit of foam there was, and thankfully there wasn't much. Brought it down to a simmer. And we'll leave it there at that simmer until it's done. Promised you a little bit more information about Ireland. And we had the opportunity to go to Ireland a few years ago and actually spend St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. And so, tell you just a little bit about that whole trip. It started with a class project from my youngest daughter Morgan, who came home with an assignment that the teacher asked her to learn more about the history of her family name. And so she asked me, where is the name Doherty from? And I said, it's from Ireland. And she said, yeah, but where? What do you know about it? And I had to be honest with her, I really didn't know all that much. I'd heard we were from County Cork. I didn't know much of anything else. So we did a little research online and actually found our family genealogy center was not at all in Cork. It was in a little town called Buncrana in County Donegal, which is at the complete opposite end of the country. Well, just to illustrate, I have her storyboard from her class project right here. My high-tech props. Here's Ireland. Here's Cork. Here's where we're from. You can't get much farther away than that, can you? The reason that a lot of people I found as we did a little research think they're from Cork, who are Irish American, is because this is the southern port town where most of the ships departed that came to America, bringing about 250,000 Irish immigrants during Angor Timor, or the Great Hunger, the potato famine, back in the 1800s. And when they arrived in the U.S. and they were being processed, their paperwork said they departed Cork, Ireland, so they just wrote down that that's where they were from. That isn't at all necessarily where they were from, and in our case, obviously, the opposite end of the country. So, I'll tell you a little bit about our St. Patrick's Day on our trip. We started the day before St. Patrick's Day doing the research up here in Inishowen Peninsula in northern Donegal County. As you can see, this is Northern Ireland, which is the area that is currently under British rule, much to the chagrin of the green part over here of the Republic of Ireland. And Ireland is basically broken into 4 big sections. Down here is called Munster. Over here in the east central is called Leinster. In the west central is called Connacht. And then up north is an area you've probably heard on the news, Ulster. Ulster encompasses all of the northern Irish counties, but then also this one county over here in the Republic of Donegal. And this is where our folks are from. I had the opportunity to visit the Family Genealogy Center here and spend more time here than my family would have preferred, and also visit the family castle ruin, what's left of the castle that stood for centuries, that was ruled by the last chieftains of Ulster, who were Dohertys. And in the one remaining tower left in the old castle ruin, I was able to climb the wall and drop in a picture of my late father, so that was very special for me to leave a picture of my dad in the old castle. We came down, we spent the night in Donegal town, or just north of there, and woke the next morning in a bed and breakfast on the lake there, and took off early in the morning on St. Patrick's Day, came down through Sligo. Sligo is a beautiful coastal community that was the home of the poet and activist William Butler Yeats, who's buried in the Drumcliff churchyard just north of Sligo, which is also home to one of the most famous of the giant Celtic crosses, the Drumcliff Cross. And we pulled onto the main road in Sligo and, unfortunately, kind of embarrassingly, found ourselves between a float and a marching band. We had accidentally turned into the St. Patrick's Day parade in Sligo. So after inching forward and pulling off as quickly as I could, somewhat embarrassed, the kids just waved out the window as though they were supposed to be there. Thankfully, our rental car was green. We waited out the parade, and we were headed to Galway when I noticed over here is this little town called Westport. Now, I'm a Kansas City kid, and if you're not a Kansas City kid, probably didn't mean that much to you. But Kansas City has a really big Irish celebration for St. Patrick's Day, listed in U.S. News & World Report this month as one of the 10 largest in the country. It's really all focused around the entertainment district in Kansas City called Westport, and around the oldest building in town, which is Kelly's Bar. Well, we went to Westport, caught the end of their parade, and actually had lunch at a place called Kelly's, which I thought was really pretty cool. And this is where I learned about the bacon joint, which was the precursor to what Irish Americans would adopt as the corned beef. And I had my bacon joint potatoes and cabbage there for lunch, and then we came down to Galway and we spent the evening in Galway. Galway is a beautiful little community, about 70,000 people, about the size of maybe Casper, Wyoming, maybe even a little smaller than Lawrence, Kansas. And but it's the cultural center of Ireland. It's where the Irish Art Institute is. It's full of artists and artisans and street musicians and dancers. And we were told before we left that the Irish don't celebrate St. Patrick's the way we do, that it's some kind of a holy day and everybody goes to Mass. Well, they may go to Mass, but they sure party at night. And they had a really great time partying in Galway, I can tell you, that night. And we partied right along with them till the wee hours of the morning. That was our experience in St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. And if you ever have the opportunity to go, I really recommend it. What a gracious and wonderful country. I'm going to leave you with a few pictures from our trip, and then when we come back, we're going to show through the miracle of YouTube how all of this comes together. Stay with us. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and here's where we pull it all together. Of course, this is the corned beef, cabbage, and potatoes, but also important to this dish are carrots and onion. Also traditional would be something like kale, which is very traditional, or a leek as opposed to an onion. You can also use parsnips, which add a really nice little bite to it and were very traditional. When you're selecting potatoes, look for the smaller potatoes, red, or these white or yellow fingerlings. The smaller fingerling or small potatoes are a lot more traditional for use in this dish. They also cook up really nicely. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our beef out, and I'm going to put it into another container to rest. What I have here is a ceramic container that I use for this purpose. Oh, what a beautiful piece of meat. Look at that thing. We'll put that in here, and I will ladle onto it just a little bit of the broth to help keep it moist and warm while it rests. It's very important for large pieces of meat to rest. The resting allows for the meat's juices to redistribute, for the meat to settle, and it makes it easier to cut and much more moist and tender and flavorful. You also want to, at this time, taste your broth. I told you before that we can always re-season the broth. Here's where we find out if it needs it. I'm going to say no. I think it's good. I think it's perfect. I've got a lot of the vegetables already cut and in the pot for the sake of time, but you want to cut your carrot. You want to peel it, wash it, peel it, trim it, and cut it into pieces that are, about an inch or so in size. They'll cook up nice and evenly. I like then to take my small potatoes and cut them into quarters, which allows them to cook at a similar time. You take your onion, and you want your onion to be cut into maybe 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thick slices, and then I like to take them and quarter them. So they wind up with the onion looking something like this. And then I take about a 1/2 head of cabbage, and I cut it into wedges. Usually a 1/2 head I can cut into 4 wedges, and then I cut those wedges into 3 pieces each, and then each of the wedges will come out something like this, and I will put those in there, and that will be my vegetables. If you want to add the parsnips, or you want to add a leek or some kale or something like that, you can certainly do that at this time. What I want to do now, though, is I'm going to put the lid back on it. I'm going to turn this back on to about medium-high, bring it back up to a boil, reduce it back down to a simmer. It will take about 15 minutes then for the vegetables to be completely done, and at that point it's ready to plate up and serve. And as we roll out, I'm going to show you what this looks like plated and ready for your family to eat. I told you I don't like to cook with Guinness. Here's where I bring the Guinness to the party. Oh, I love that stuff. If you're like me and you like a pint of Guinness, or you like a little bit of your favorite Irish whiskey, enjoy that responsibly on St. Patrick's Day. Designate a driver. Come back to us safely next time. We'll look forward to seeing you again the next time on the Dog Dish. And Slainte. Take care.